Jake Martinez had always dreamed of visiting London. The 23-year-old college student from Phoenix, Arizona, had saved every penny from his part-time job at a local diner for 2 years to afford this trip. His friends called him crazy for spending his entire savings on a vacation, but Jake didn't care. He wanted to see the famous landmarks, taste authentic fish and chips, and most importantly, witness the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace. The morning sun painted the London streets in golden hues as Jake stepped out of his budget hostel. He wore his favorite red baseball cap, cargo shorts, and sneakers that had seen better days. Around his neck hung an expensive camera his grandmother had given him for graduation. Today was going to be special, he could feel it. His first stop was a small ice cream shop near Westminster Bridge. The elderly British shopkeeper, Mrs. Henderson, smiled warmly as Jake struggled to choose between the dozens of flavors displayed in the glass case. Her thick London accent made everything sound magical to Jake's American ears. "First time in London, love?" she asked, noticing his wide-eyed expression and tourist map sticking out of his back pocket. "Yes, ma'am," Jake replied enthusiastically. "I've been planning this trip for forever. I want to see everything. Big Ben, the Tower Bridge, and especially the Royal Guards at Buckingham Palace." Mrs. Henderson's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Well then, you'll be needing something special for such an important day." She scooped generous portions of vanilla and strawberry ice cream into a waffle cone, adding extra whipped cream and colorful sprinkles. "This one's on the house, dear. Consider it a proper British welcome." Jake's face lit up like a child on Christmas morning. He thanked her repeatedly, promising to recommend her shop to everyone back home. The ice cream was perfect, creamy, sweet, and cold against the unusual warmth of the London morning. As he walked toward Buckingham Palace, Jake couldn't contain his excitement. He stopped every few minutes to take photos of red telephone booths, black cabs, and the iconic double-decker buses. Other tourists smiled at his obvious enthusiasm, remembering their own first visits to the historic city. The streets grew busier as he approached the palace. Families with children, elderly couples with guidebooks, and groups of teenagers all moved in the same direction. Street performers played music on corners while vendors sold souvenirs and Union Jack flags. Jake checked his watch. 10:30 a.m. Perfect timing for the 11 o'clock ceremony. He quickened his pace, careful not to let his precious ice cream drip on his clean white t-shirt. This was it, the moment he had been dreaming about for months. The magnificent gates of Buckingham Palace came into view, and Jake stopped in his tracks. Even the photos hadn't prepared him for the real thing. The building was enormous with its pale stone facade and intricate architectural details. The famous balcony where the royal family appeared during special occasions seemed to glow in the morning light. Hundreds of people were already gathering behind the metal barriers set up for the ceremony. Jake found a spot near the front, squeezing between a family from Germany and a group of Japanese tourists. Everyone was chatting excitedly in different languages, but the anticipation was universal. He pulled out his camera and started taking pictures of everything: the palace, the crowd, even his ice cream cone with the magnificent building in the background. His phone buzzed with messages from friends back home asking for updates, but Jake was too absorbed in the moment to reply. The ice cream began to soften in the warm sun, requiring more frequent licks to prevent drips. Jake didn't mind. Everything was perfect. He was exactly where he wanted to be, experiencing the trip of a lifetime. Little did he know that in just 30 minutes this perfect day would take a turn that would change everything, and make him famous for all the wrong reasons. At exactly 11 o'clock, the crowd fell silent. The massive gates of Buckingham Palace began to open with a deep metallic groan that sent shivers down Jake's spine. This was the moment he had traveled over 5,000 miles to witness. The first royal guard appeared, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. The man was impossibly tall and dignified, wearing the iconic red tunic with gold buttons and the famous black bearskin hat that added another foot to his already impressive height. His polished black boots reflected the sunlight as he marched with mechanical precision. More guards followed in perfect formation. Their faces were stone-like, showing no emotion whatsoever. Jake had read about their legendary discipline, how they could stand motionless for hours, never breaking character no matter what happened around them. They were like living statues, symbols of centuries of British tradition and military excellence. The guard nearest to Jake's section was particularly striking. He was young, probably in his mid-20s, with sharp features barely visible beneath the shadow of his bearskin hat. His name tag read Guard Thompson. Every movement was calculated and precise, from the way he held his rifle to the perfect angle of his shoulders. Jake frantically snapped photos trying to capture every detail. The gold braiding on their uniforms, the pristine white gloves, the way the morning light caught the brass buttons, everything was photogenic perfection. His ice cream, now considerably softer, required constant attention to prevent sticky disasters. The ceremony was mesmerizing. The guards moved like a well-oiled machine, each step synchronized with the others. Their commander barked orders in a crisp British accent that echoed off the palace walls. Tourists held their breath, afraid to make noise that might disturb the solemn ritual. As the guards took their positions, Jake noticed something that made his heart race with excitement. Guard Thompson was standing directly in front of his section, less than 10 feet away. The young American had never been this close to such pageantry and tradition. This was the perfect opportunity for the ultimate tourist photo. Jake carefully balanced his ice cream in his left hand while raising his camera with his right. He wanted to get the perfect shot, himself with the royal guard in the background, proving to everyone back home that he had really experienced this amazing moment. Other tourists around him had the same idea. Phones and cameras were discreetly raised for selfies and group photos. The guards, as expected, remained completely motionless and professional, giving no acknowledgement to the clicking cameras and whispered comments. The German family next to Jake was taking turns posing near the barrier. The Japanese tourists were using selfie sticks to get better angles. Even elderly couples were asking strangers to take their pictures with the magnificent guards in the background. Jake waited patiently for his turn. He wanted everything to be perfect. The lighting, the angle, the composition. This photo would definitely become his profile picture on social media. His friends would be so jealous when they saw him posing confidently in front of the world-famous royal guards. The ice cream continued to melt, becoming stickier and more difficult to manage. Drops of vanilla and strawberry began to slide down the cone despite Jake's best efforts. He considered throwing it away, but Mrs. Henderson's kindness made him reluctant to waste such a thoughtful gift. Guard Thompson remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed straight ahead at some invisible point in the distance. His discipline was incredible. Jake wondered what kind of training these men went through to achieve such perfect self-control. How did they manage to ignore the chaos of hundreds of tourists surrounding them? The sun grew warmer, making the ice cream even more problematic. Jake tried to eat it faster while simultaneously preparing for his photo opportunity. He wiped his free hand on his shorts and checked his camera settings one more time. This was it, his moment to capture the perfect memory of his dream vacation. He had no idea that within minutes, this innocent desire for a tourist photo would spiral into an international incident that would make headlines around the world and turn his name into a cautionary tale about respecting royal traditions. Jake's moment had arrived. The crowd around him had thinned slightly as some tourists moved to get better views from different angles. He now had a clear path to the barrier and an unobstructed view of Guard Thompson, who continued to stand at perfect attention just a few feet away. Taking a deep breath, Jake approached the metal railing that separated tourists from the guards. His plan was simple: lean against the barrier, hold up his melting ice cream cone with a big smile, and snap the perfect selfie with the royal guard in the background. It would be the ultimate souvenir photo. He positioned himself carefully, making sure Guard Thompson would be perfectly framed behind him. The guard's impressive height and pristine uniform would make an incredible backdrop. Jake could already imagine the likes and comments this photo would receive when he posted it online. The ice cream was now seriously melting. Pink and white streams ran down his fingers despite his attempts to keep up with the constant drips. The waffle cone was becoming soggy and difficult to grip. Jake knew he needed to take this photo quickly before his treat became a complete mess. He extended his arm for the selfie, angling the camera to capture both himself and the stoic guard. The sun was perfect, creating just the right lighting for his shot. Everything was aligned beautifully. This was going to be the photo of a lifetime, but disaster struck in the worst possible way. As Jake leaned forward to get the perfect angle, his elbow accidentally bumped into a Japanese tourist who was also trying to take a photo. The collision was minor, barely noticeable to most people, but it was enough to throw off Jake's carefully balanced grip on his increasingly messy ice cream cone. Time seemed to slow down as Jake watched in horror. The cone slipped from his sticky fingers, tumbling through the air in a graceful arc that seemed to last forever. His first instinct was to catch it, but his reflexes were too slow and his hands too slippery from the melted cream. The ice cream cone sailed over the metal barrier like a sugary missile, spinning end over end. Jake's eyes widened as he realized the trajectory was taking it directly toward Guard Thompson. He opened his mouth to shout a warning, but no sound came out. He was frozen in shock, unable to believe what was happening. The cone hit Guard Thompson square in the chest with a wet splat that seemed to echo across the entire courtyard. Pink strawberry ice cream and white vanilla cream exploded across his pristine red tunic, creating a colorful mess that dripped down the gold buttons and ceremonial braiding. Whipped cream and rainbow sprinkles stuck to the fabric like confetti at a children's party. The impact was so unexpected that even the disciplined royal guard couldn't completely hide his surprise. His eyes flickered downward for just a split second before snapping back to attention, but that tiny break in composure was enough to show that he was human after all. The crowd around Jake went completely silent. Hundreds of tourists who had been chatting and taking photos suddenly stopped everything they were doing. Cameras that had been clicking constantly were lowered as people stared in disbelief at what had just happened. Jake stood frozen at the barrier, his empty hands still positioned as if he were holding the cone. His mouth hung open in shock and his face turned as red as the guard's ice cream-stained tunic. He couldn't believe what he had just done. This was supposed to be the perfect moment of his dream vacation, not a complete disaster. The other royal guards maintained their positions and composure, but Jake could sense the tension in the air. This wasn't just a minor tourist mishap. This was a breach of protocol at one of Britain's most sacred ceremonies. The changing of the guard was a solemn tradition that had been performed for centuries, and Jake had just turned it into a comedy of errors. Guard Thompson continued to stand at attention with ice cream dripping down his uniform, displaying the kind of professional discipline that made the royal guards legendary. But Jake knew that beneath that stoic exterior, the man had to be furious. Anyone would be angry about having their ceremonial uniform destroyed by a careless tourist's dessert. The security personnel positioned around the perimeter began to move, their attention now focused on the American tourist who had just committed what might be considered an assault on a member of the Royal Guard. Jake's perfect day was about to become his worst nightmare, and he still couldn't quite believe how quickly everything had gone wrong. The silence that followed the ice cream incident lasted only seconds, but to Jake it felt like hours. He stood paralyzed at the barrier, watching pink and white cream slowly slide down Guard Thompson's red tunic. The rainbow sprinkles caught the sunlight like tiny jewels against the dark fabric of his ceremonial uniform. Then chaos erupted. "Oh my God, did you see that?" whispered a British woman behind Jake, her voice carrying further than she intended in the dead silence. "He just threw ice cream at the Royal Guard," gasped a German tourist, raising his camera to capture the aftermath. Within seconds, every phone and camera in the crowd was pointed at Jake and the ice cream-covered guard. The clicking of camera shutters filled the air like mechanical applause. Jake realized with growing horror that this moment was being recorded by hundreds of people from dozens of countries. Two uniformed security officers immediately began moving toward Jake's position. Their faces were serious and professional, but Jake could see the barely controlled anger in their eyes. This wasn't just a clumsy accident anymore, this was a security incident at one of Britain's most important royal sites. "Sir, please step away from the barrier," ordered the first security officer, a tall man with gray hair and stern features. His voice was polite but firm. The kind of tone that suggested immediate compliance was not optional. Jake's legs felt like jelly as he stumbled backward from the metal railing. I'm so sorry," he stammered, his American accent sounding foreign and out of place. "It was an accident, I swear it was an accident." Guard Thompson remained motionless at his post, ice cream still dripping from his uniform onto the pristine pavement below. The other royal guards continued their ceremony as if nothing had happened, but Jake could sense the tension rippling through their ranks. Their training demanded they maintain composure, but this was clearly an unprecedented situation. The crowd of tourists began to buzz with excitement and disbelief. Children pointed at the colorful mess on the guard's uniform while their parents tried to shush them. Elderly couples whispered urgently to each other in various languages. The Japanese tourists who had been so polite and quiet suddenly became animated, discussing the incident in rapid, excited voices. "Is that young man in trouble?" asked an elderly American woman, her voice full of concern. "He's about to be," replied her husband grimly, watching as more security personnel appeared from various positions around the palace grounds. Jake's phone began buzzing frantically in his pocket as notifications poured in. Somehow videos of the incident were already appearing on social media. His heart sank as he realized that within minutes, this embarrassing moment would be seen by thousands of people around the world. A third security officer approached, this one carrying a radio and speaking in rapid, urgent tones to someone at the other end. Jake caught fragments of the conversation. "Incident at the main gate. Civilian involved. Need supervisor immediately." The German family that had been standing next to Jake quietly moved away, not wanting to be associated with the troublemaker. The Japanese tourists continued filming, now focusing their cameras on Jake's increasingly panicked face rather than the ceremonial guards. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us," said the second security officer, a woman with short blonde hair and sharp blue eyes. "We need to discuss this incident in private." Jake's stomach dropped. This was really happening. He wasn't just going to get a stern warning or be asked to leave. He was being detained for throwing ice cream at a royal guard. The vacation he had saved for 2 years to afford was turning into an international incident. "Please, it really was an accident," Jake pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. "I would never intentionally disrespect the guards or the royal family. I have so much respect for British traditions." The security officers exchanged glances. They had probably heard similar claims from tourists before, but the evidence was literally dripping down Guard Thompson's uniform. Whether intentional or not, Jake had committed a serious breach of protocol at one of Britain's most sacred ceremonies. As they began to escort him away from the crowd, Jake caught one last glimpse of Guard Thompson. Despite the ice cream covering his ceremonial tunic, the young guard remained perfectly still, staring straight ahead with unwavering discipline. Jake felt a wave of admiration mixed with deep shame. This man was a true professional, and Jake had made a mockery of his service. The last thing Jake heard as he was led away was the continued clicking of cameras and the excited chatter of tourists discussing what they had just witnessed. His name would soon be trending on social media, but not for any reason he had ever imagined. Jake found himself in a small windowless room inside a building adjacent to Buckingham Palace. The walls were painted a dull beige color, and the only furniture consisted of a metal table and 3 chairs. A single fluorescent light hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made everything look cold and official. The security officers who had escorted him sat across the table, their expression serious but not unkind. The older man, who had introduced himself as Chief Security Officer Williams, opened a folder and pulled out a pen. The woman, Officer Sarah Collins, placed a small recording device on the table between them. "This interview is being recorded for security purposes," Officer Collins explained in a crisp, professional voice. "Please state your full name and nationality for the record." "Jake Martinez, American citizen," Jake replied, his voice barely above a whisper. His hands were shaking slightly as he placed them flat on the cold metal table. Chief Williams leaned back in his chair, studying Jake's face carefully. "Mr. Martinez, can you explain to us exactly what happened out there? Take your time and be as detailed as possible." Jake took a deep breath and began his story. He explained about saving money for 2 years, about Mrs. Henderson's kindness at the ice cream shop, about his excitement to see the changing of the guard ceremony. His voice grew stronger as he described his genuine love for British culture and traditions. "I've studied British history in college," Jake said earnestly. "I know how important the Royal Guards are to your country. I would never ever intentionally disrespect them or what they represent." Officer Collins took notes while Jake spoke, occasionally looking up to study his expression. "You mentioned bumping into another tourist. Can you describe exactly how that happened?" Jake demonstrated with his hands, showing how he'd been positioned for a selfie when the accidental collision occurred. "It was just a tiny bump, barely anything really. But my hands were already slippery from the melted ice cream, and I guess I was holding it too loosely. "Why didn't you throw the ice cream away earlier if it was causing problems?" Chief Williams asked, his tone neutral but probing. "The lady at the shop, Mrs. Henderson, was so kind to me. She gave it to me for free and said it was a proper British welcome. I didn't want to waste her gift." Jake's eyes began to water as he thought about how his attempt to honor the shopkeeper's kindness had led to this disaster. The officers exchanged glances. They had been dealing with tourist incidents for years, but most involved intentional misbehavior or deliberate attempts to get attention. Jake's story had the ring of truth to it, but they still had to follow protocol. "Mr. Martinez, are you aware that interfering with a royal guard in the performance of their duties is a serious offense?" Officer Collins asked, her voice gentler now. Jake's face went pale. No, I mean, yes, I guess I should have known that. But I really didn't interfere intentionally. It was just a terrible accident." Chief Williams pulled out his phone and showed Jake the screen. "This video has already been viewed over 50,000 times, and it was posted less than an hour ago. You're becoming quite famous, I'm afraid." Jake watched in horror as his clumsy accident played out in slow motion on the tiny screen. From this angle, shot by a tourist standing to his left, it looked even worse than he remembered. The ice cream cone seemed to fly through the air with deliberate precision, striking Guard Thompson with perfect accuracy. "Oh no," Jake moaned, burying his face in his hands. "My parents are going to see this. My friends, my professors, everyone back home. They're going to think I'm some kind of disrespectful tourist who makes Americans look bad." "Actually," Officer Collins said, consulting her notes, "most of the comments we've seen so far seem to support your version of events. Many people are calling it an obvious accident and praising your visible remorse." This was little comfort to Jake, who could imagine his face becoming an internet meme. He would forever be known as the American who threw ice cream at a royal guard, regardless of his intentions or the circumstances. Chief Williams closed his folder and leaned forward. "Mr. Martinez, we believe your account of what happened. However, the fact remains that a ceremonial uniform has been damaged and a security protocol has been breached. There will have to be consequences." Jake's heart sank. He had visions of being banned from the UK, or worse, facing criminal charges that would follow him for the rest of his life. His dream vacation was becoming his worst nightmare, and he still couldn't quite believe how quickly everything had changed. "What kind of consequences?" he asked quietly, preparing himself for the worst possible news. The fluorescent light continued to hum overhead, and the small room suddenly felt very cold despite the warm London morning outside. Chief Williams stood up from his chair and walked to the small window, gazing out at the bustling activity around Buckingham Palace. Jake watched nervously, trying to read the older man's expression for any hint of what was coming next. "Mr. Martinez," Chief Williams began, turning back to face him. "In my 23 years of security work here, I've dealt with protesters, pranksters, and genuine troublemakers. I've seen people throw things at guards intentionally, try to climb barriers, and even attempt to breach the palace grounds." He paused, studying Jake's anxious face. "What I saw today was different." Jake held his breath, unsure whether this was leading to good news or bad news. Officer Collins consulted her phone again. "The video that's going viral actually works in your favor, Mr. Martinez. It clearly shows the accidental collision, your immediate shock and remorse, and your genuine attempt to apologize. Social media users are calling you the most polite tourist disaster and praising your obvious respect for British traditions. However," Chief Williams continued, sitting back down, "there are still consequences we need to discuss. The cleaning and potential replacement of Guard Thompson's ceremonial uniform will cost approximately £800. These uniforms are handcrafted and must meet exact military specifications." Jake's heart sank. £800 was nearly $1,000 American, money he simply didn't have. He had spent almost everything on the trip itself, and his remaining budget was barely enough to cover his remaining days in London. "I understand, sir," Jake said quietly. "I'll find a way to pay for it even if I have to take out a loan or work extra jobs when I get home." Officer Collins smiled for the first time during the interview. "Actually, Mr. Martinez, there's been an interesting development while we've been talking." She turned her phone around to show Jake a news article that had just been published. The headline read, "American Tourists Ice Cream. Mishap Wins Hearts Worldwide. Donations Pour In." Jake stared at the screen in disbelief. "Donations? Mrs. Henderson from the ice cream shop has been contacted by several news outlets, Chief Williams explained. She confirmed your story about receiving the free ice cream and spoke very highly of your character. Her interview has been shared thousands of times. Officer Collins scrolled through her phone. People from around the world are sending money to cover the uniform replacement costs. Someone set up a crowdfunding page called Help Jake Fix His Ice Cream Mistake, and it's already raised over £3,000. Jake's mouth dropped open. He couldn't believe that strangers from around the world would want to help him fix his embarrassing mistake. But why would people do that for me? Because your reaction was genuine, Chief Williams said. In an age of stage stunts and fake viral moments, people recognized authentic human kindness and honest remorse when they saw it. There was a knock on the door, and another security officer entered carrying a tablet. He whispered something to Chief Williams, who nodded and looked back at Jake with an expression that might have been amusement. Mr. Martinez, it appears that Guard Thompson has requested to speak with you personally. Jake's eyes widened with fear. He wants to yell at me, doesn't he? I don't blame him. I ruined his uniform and embarrassed him in front of hundreds of people. Actually, Officer Collins said, standing up, I think you'll be surprised by what he wants to say. They led Jake through several corridors and into a small break room where Guard Thompson sat at a table, now wearing a regular military uniform instead of his ceremonial tunic. He looked younger without the imposing bearskin hat, probably close to Jake's own age. Mr. Martinez, Guard Thompson said, standing up with a slight smile. I'm James Thompson. I wanted to thank you. Jake stared at him in confusion. Thank me? For ruining your uniform and making you look foolish? James laughed, a sound that seemed strange coming from someone Jake had only seen in stoic silence. For reminding me that we're all human. In the 3 years I've been a Royal Guard, I've never had such a perfectly timed reminder that life doesn't always go according to plan. I'm still incredibly sorry, Jake said earnestly. I have so much respect for what you do, and I never wanted to interfere with your duties. I know, James replied. And that's exactly why this whole situation has become such a positive story. Your genuine remorse and respect have actually brought more positive attention to the Royal Guards than we've had in years. Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. His worst nightmare was somehow turning into something positive, and he still wasn't sure how that was possible. James extended his hand for a proper introduction. So Jake Martinez from Phoenix, Arizona. Would you like to take that photo you were trying to get when this all started? 3 months later, Jake sat in his apartment in Phoenix, Arizona, staring at the framed photograph on his desk. It showed him and James Thompson standing together in the palace break room, both smiling genuinely at the camera. It wasn't the formal tourist photo he had originally planned, but it was infinitely more meaningful. The ice cream incident had indeed changed his life, but in ways he never could have imagined. The viral video had been viewed over 10 million times, and Jake had become known worldwide as the accidental tourist, whose honest mistake and genuine remorse had won hearts. Across the globe, the crowdfunding campaign had raised enough money not only to replace Guard Thompson's uniform, but also to establish a small scholarship fund for students wanting to study British history and culture. Jake had been amazed to discover that people from over 40 countries had contributed, all moved by what they saw as an authentic moment of human connection in an increasingly artificial world. Mrs. Henderson's ice cream shop had become a tourist destination in its own right. Visitors came specifically to meet the kind woman who had given the famous American boy his free ice cream. She had been interviewed by the BBC and had written a small book about kindness to strangers that became a bestseller in the UK. Jake had received hundreds of letters and emails from around the world. Some were from fellow travelers sharing their own embarrassing tourist moments. Others were from people who said his genuine remorse and the positive outcome had restored their faith in human kindness. A few were even from other Royal Guards who admitted they had enjoyed seeing their colleagues' perfect composure finally crack. Just for a moment, the most unexpected outcome had been his friendship with James Thompson. They had stayed in touch through social media and video calls, discovering they had much in common despite growing up on different continents. James had visited Phoenix during his vacation time, and Jake was planning another trip to London to visit his friend properly. The funny thing, James had told him during their last video call, is that incident made me a better guard. I used to be so focused on being perfect and emotionless that I forgot we're supposed to represent the best of British character, which includes being gracious and forgiving when accidents happen. Jake had also learned something important about himself. The incident had taught him that mistakes, even embarrassing public ones, didn't have to define him negatively. How he handled the aftermath was far more important than the mistake itself. His professors at college had been impressed by his newfound confidence and maturity. The shy student who had once struggled to speak up in class was now comfortable, sharing his story with others, and had even given a presentation about cultural sensitivity and the power of authentic communication. The local newspaper in Phoenix had featured Jake in an article about positive viral moments, and he had been invited to speak at several community events about his experience. He always emphasized the same message: treat others with kindness, take responsibility for your mistakes, and be genuinely sorry when you mess up. Jake's phone buzzed with a text message from James. Saw the news about your scholarship application to Oxford. Fingers crossed you get accepted. I'll show you all the best ice cream shops in England, and I promise to stand far away while you eat. Smiling, Jake looked at his acceptance letter from Oxford University, which had arrived just that morning. His essay about learning from mistakes and the importance of cultural exchange had helped secure him a spot in their international relations program. The scholarship money from his viral fame had made it financially possible. He picked up the framed photo and studied James's smiling face. Who would have thought that the worst moment of his dream vacation would lead to the best opportunities of his life? Sometimes the most embarrassing mistakes turned out to be the most valuable experiences. As he began planning his return to London as a student rather than a tourist, Jake made a mental note to visit Mrs. Henderson's shop again. This time he would definitely finish his ice cream before getting anywhere near Buckingham Palace. Some lessons he had learned were worth remembering forever. The ice cream incident had taught him that genuine mistakes, handled with grace and honesty, could build bridges between strangers and create connections that lasted a lifetime. It wasn't the perfect day he had planned, but it had given him something far more valuable: a perfect story about the power of human kindness and understanding.